So a little bit over a week ago, I made a video where I talked about each NBA team's best move since the year 2010. And today we are doing the complete opposite. We're going to be talking about each NBA team's worst move in the last decade. So this could be a bad trade, a bad signing, a bad draft pick, or maybe just not bringing back one of their own free agents. Some of these bad moves are a lot worse than some others. Like there are some teams like the Boston Celtics and Toronto Raptors and the Golden State Warriors really didn't have that many bad moves of the decade, but teams like the New York Knicks, the LA Lakers, the Sacramento Kings, they had a lot more bad moves. So if you guys are enjoying these videos, let's see if we can hit 1,500 likes like we did in the every team's best move of the decade. And if you disagree with any of these picks, let me know in the comments below. And without further ado, let's get into this. And starting off this list is going to be the Atlanta Hawks, and their worst move of the 2010s was signing Dwight Howard to a fully guaranteed 3-year, $70.5 million deal in the 2016 offseason. Dwight Howard only played one season with the Hawks. He averaged 13.5 points, 12.5 rebounds, and then was later traded to Charlotte in the 2017 offseason. I thought about maybe putting them not getting anything for Al Horford or Paul Millsap and letting them walk as free agents, but I ended up going with Dwight as their pick here. Remember how I mentioned the Boston Celtics in the beginning of the video? Yeah, they didn't really have that many bad moves of the decade, so the one I had for them was actually trading for Kyrie Irving. All these are going to be in hindsight, and there's going to be no to be fairs allowed. Yes, trading for Kyrie Irving, you would do that any day of the week, but it did not work out at all for the Celtics. Irving played 2 seasons in Boston and only played in 1 playoffs, and that was in 2019, where they lost in 5 to Milwaukee in the second round. They gave up a fan favorite Isaiah Thomas. They gave up a future top 10 pick that was the Nets pick that ended up being Colin Sexton. They gave up a former first round pick, Ante Zizic, the year prior. And pretty much all Kyrie was for them was just a head case. There was always a locker room issue, mainly in the 2018-19 season. Everything was about his upcoming free agency, and I have him making the worst move of the decade for the Celtics. Moving over to Brooklyn, this one was fairly easy, and that was trading for Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, and trading away 3 future first round picks that ended up being Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Colin Sexton. Credit, they did make the playoffs with Paul Pierce on the team, but it just didn't work out. KG, Pierce, they had Darren Williams, they had Joe Johnson, they had Brook Lopez. Maybe in 2008, this would have been an NBA Finals contender, but these guys were way past their prime, and giving up 3 future first-round picks down the line wasn't a great idea for Brooklyn. For pretty much the whole 2010s, the Charlotte Hornets failed to draft anybody to pair up with Kemba Walker. If it was Frank Kaminsky, Noah Vonleh, Malik Monk. But I am going with the pick that they selected number 2 overall in the 2012 draft, and that was selecting Michael Kidd-Gilchrist. Bradley Beal ended up being the pick right after MKG here. MKG ended up playing 7 full seasons for the Hornets. He averaged around 8.5 points, 5.5 rebounds, and shot 47% from the field. But with guys like Bradley Beal and Damian Lillard going after him, it wasn't a great move by the Hornets. For the Chicago Bulls, it was pretty hard because throughout the first half of the decade, they weren't too bad. They had good players like Joakim Noah, but they knew when to let him walk and not bring him back and overpay for him. They got good assets for Jimmy Butler, at least at the time. And Derrick Rose wasn't what he was in his MVP season, so it's not like they screwed up any of those moves. So I ended up going with them hiring Jim Boylen. Boylen has coached 2 seasons in Chicago so far after replacing Fred Hoiberg in the 2018-19 season, and he has a career 39-84 record so far, but it just seems every time that there is something in the news for the Bulls, it's always him not getting well along with players, and it's just players not liking Boylen, and just the fans absolutely despise Boylen, so he's making the pick as the worst move for the Bulls in the 2010s. Coming in for the Cavs pick as the worst move for the 2010s for them was drafting Anthony Bennett, number 1 overall in the 2013 NBA draft. Bennett played 1 season in Cleveland, averaging 4.5 points, 3 rebounds, and shooting 35% from the field in under 13 minutes per night. Drafting Anthony Bennett number 1 overall caught pretty much everybody surprised when that happened. Nobody really thought he was going to go in the top 5, let alone go number 1 overall. Yes, they used him, I guess, to make the salary work out to get Kevin Love, but still, it was a pretty horrible move by them, and that is coming in as the worst move of the decade for the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Dallas Mavericks trading for Rajon Rondo in 2014 comes in as the worst move for them in the 2010s on my list. They basically traded away Jay Crowder, Jameer Nelson, Brandon Wright, and a future first round pick and a future second round pick for Rajon Rondo and Dwight Powell. And this isn't really a horrible move. It's just, I think it was their worst move of the decade, and they're a good run franchise, so they don't have a lot of bad moves of the decade. And most of these bad moves come with locker room or cultural issues, because we already talked about Kyrie Irving, we talked about Jim Boylen, and now we're talking about Rondo. It's just like the repetitive theme here is just that these players don't bring in a good culture, and it just doesn't work out in the locker room, and that's why Rondo is coming in on this list for the Mavericks. For the Denver Nuggets, it was trading away the rights to Donovan Mitchell and and Rudy Gobert. Denver basically trading away the pick that got Donovan Mitchell to get Trey Lyles and a later first really wasn't a great idea, and they ended up trading the late first that ended up being Rudy Gobert to Utah, like Donovan Mitchell was as well. With Arturas Karnisovas and Tim Connolly, like the Dallas Mavericks, like the Boston Celtics, the Denver Nuggets have been a well-run franchise for a while now, but obviously in hindsight, this was not a great move or moves whatsoever, trading away rights to two future 2020 All-Stars. Moving over to Detroit now, and their worst move of the 2010s was trading for Blake Griffin in 2018, and they basically traded away Avery Bradley, Tobias Harris, Boban Marjanovic, and a 2018 first-round pick, while also trading a 2019 second-round pick as well, and the Clippers obviously used that first-round pick that they got in this trade to end up trading a second and getting SGA. But yeah, this really set the Pistons back. Yeah, they ended up making the playoffs as an 8th seed in 2019, but yeah, they got swept by Milwaukee, so they basically made this trade to have 2 home playoff games. Not a great idea whatsoever, because who knows what they would be right now if they had maybe SGA on their team and they had Andre Drummond and Tobias Harris, and they wouldn't have Blake Griffin, who played great in 2019. Yeah, he was probably a top 15 player, but he wasn't a player that was going to lead them anywhere into the Eastern Conference. They set themselves up for NBA purgatory. As you know, they were flirting with the 8th or 7th seed, but you know what, they ended up trading away Drummond. Hopefully they'll start their rebuild and kind of tank next year, but yeah, this trade set them back a couple years. For the Golden State Warriors, it was really hard to find their worst move of the decade. Obviously, they were the best team of the decade, as well as probably the Miami Heat, but their worst move was drafting Epke Udoh 6th overall in the 2010 NBA draft. Udoh basically played in 93 games, a season and a half for the Warriors, averaging 4.8 points, 3.7 rebounds, and shot 43% from the field. And notable guys that went after him were Gordon Hayward, Paul George, and Eric Bledsoe. Moving over to Houston now, and their worst move was signing Ryan Anderson to a 4-year, $80 million deal in the 2016 offseason. The 2016 offseason led to a lot of bad moves of the decade for a lot of teams. Anderson played in 2 seasons, 138 games for the Rockets before getting traded to Phoenix. He averaged 11.5 points, 5 rebounds, and shot 39% from 3 for them. He wasn't horrible, but it really didn't work out for them, and the Rockets have been pretty good over the decades, so Ryan Anderson is going to come in at this slot. The Pacers have been a well-run organization for the 2010s, like a couple of these other teams, but their worst move was basically trading away the rights to Kawhi Leonard for George Hill. Yes, they had Paul George and Danny Granger at the time, but they traded away the 15th pick in the 2011 draft to the Spurs, and they ended up taking Kawhi Leonard. The Pacers really didn't make that many bad moves this decade, so I ended up including this, and it wasn't even that bad, because in hindsight, who knows if they would even have drafted Kawhi here at 15. The LA Clippers. So you may have forgot about this move, but their worst move of the decade was by far trading away their 2011 unprotected first-round pick to the Cavs for Jamario Moon and Mo Williams. The Clippers also sent out Baron Davis as well. But yeah, that 2011 first round pick ended up turning into the #1 overall pick from the NBA draft lottery, and the Cavs took Kyrie Irving. The main player in this trade was Mo Williams for the Clippers, and he ended up playing in 86 games for the Clippers, averaged 13.5 points, 5 assists, and shot 41% from the field. Yeah, I think they would have rather had Kyrie Irving instead of Mo Williams to pair up with Blake Griffin. And coming in for the other LA team, the Lakers' worst move of the 2010s was signing Timothy Mozgov to a 4-year, $64 million contract. Mozgov only played 54 games for the Lakers, and the reason why I chose Mozgov over Luol Deng was because they had to include their former #2 overall pick, D'Angelo Russell, who was nowhere near being considered a bust at all. He was still a promising young player, but they had to package him just to get off the Mozgov contract to send him to Brooklyn. That's how bad the signing was. On to Memphis now, and their worst move of the decade was giving Chandler Parsons a 4-year, $94 million contract in the 2016 offseason. He played in 95 games for the Grizzlies, averaging 7.5 points, 2.5 rebounds, and shot 39% from the field in under 20 minutes a night. Yeah, that was a bust of a free agent signing for the Grizzlies. Now let's talk about the best team in the NBA right now, the Milwaukee Bucks, and their worst move of the decade was drafting Thon Maker 10th overall in the 2016 NBA draft. Maker played in 166 games for the Milwaukee Bucks, averaging 4 points per night, 2.5 rebounds, and shot 42% from the field. The reason why he's on this list, because a lot of people thought this was a reach by far. They took that glimpse of potential, maybe what they saw in Giannis here in Maker, but he ended up being a giant bust. The Miami Heat are a really well-ran franchise, but in 2016, Tyler Johnson became a restricted free agent. The Nets threw at him a 4-year, $50 million offer sheet, and the Heat decided to match it, which turned into their worst free agency signing of the decade. Or should I say their worst move of the decade. After this contract extension, Tyler Johnson played in 116 games for the Heat, averaging 11 points, 3 rebounds, and shot 42% from the field. Minnesota had a really rough start to the decade, and their worst move was drafting Wesley Johnson 4th overall in the 2010 draft, and the pick that went right after Wesley was DeMarcus Cousins. Wesley Johnson only played 2 years in Minnesota, averaging 7.5 points, 3 rebounds, and shot 39% from the field. Yeah, his career was pretty much over before it even started in Minnesota. I never really got this free agency signing, but yeah, the New Orleans Pelicans signed Solomon Hill to a 4-year, $48 million contract in the 2016 offseason. The Pelicans were just magically impressed by his 7.5 points, 4 rebounds, and shot 45% from the field in 7 playoff games in the 2016 playoffs to give him $48 million guaranteed. He ended up playing 136 games in New Orleans, averaging 5.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and shot 37% from the field. Speaking of bad contract signings, let's talk about the New York Knicks signing Joakim Noah to a 4-year, $72 million contract in the 2016 offseason. Joakim Noah played in 53 games for the Knicks from 2016 to 2018, averaging 4.5 points, 8 rebounds, and shot 49% from the field, then ended up getting bought out by the Knicks, and they're still paying him $6 million a year. In the 2017 offseason, the OKC Thunder signed Andre Roberson to a 3-year, $30 million contract extension, and after signing this 3-year, $30 million contract extension with the Thunder, Roberson only ended up playing in 39 more games for the Thunder, averaging 5 points, 5 rebounds, and shot 53% from the field, but he hasn't played since the 2017-18 season, and that's why he's coming in on this list. And moving on to the second Florida team here in the NBA, the worst move the Orlando Magic made in the 2010s was trading for Serge Ibaka and giving up Ersan Ilyasova, Victor Oladipo, and Domantas Sabonis. Ibaka only played in 1 season for the Magic in 56 games, averaging 15 points, 6.8 rebounds, and shooting 48% from the field, and then ended up trading him to Toronto for Terrence Ross and a 2017 first-round pick that ended up being Arnas Pašniks. So they basically traded Ersan Ilyasova, Victor Oladipo, and Domantas Sabonis for Terrence Ross and Arnas Pašniks. For the Philadelphia 76ers, they were pretty bad throughout the middle of the decade when they started tanking, trust the process, all of that, and their worst move was drafting Jahlil Okafor 3rd overall in the 2015 NBA draft. This is looked at as their worst move because you know who went right after Okafor? Kristaps Porzingis. He could have been an amazing fit with Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid. Okafor wasn't bad his rookie year, but you kind of knew that he wasn't going to fit whatsoever with Nerlens Noel, who they drafted in 2013, and then Joel Embiid was going to be coming back the year after in 2017, and they all three weren't going to fit together, so this just wasn't a great pick. They wanted D'Angelo Russell, and they kind of panicked here, I guess, and took Jahlil Okafor. The Phoenix Suns had some really bad draft picks in this decade, like Marquise Chris, a top 10 pick, Dragon Bender, a top 5 pick, Alex Len, a top 5 pick, but I ended up going with drafting Josh Jackson, number 4 overall in the 2017 NBA draft. Throughout the college season, pretty much everybody thought he was going to get selected before the other small forward that went the pick prior in Jason Tatum, but Jackson ended up only playing in 156 games in 2 seasons for the Suns, averaging 12 points, 4.5 rebounds, and shot 41% from the field and had some off the court issues. There was that whole thing where he apparently gave his kid marijuana. That was just kind of a wild story. And yeah, guys like Lauri Markkanen, Jonathan Isaac, Donovan Mitchell, De'Aaron Fox that went right after him were kind of some picks that would have made a little bit more sense for Phoenix. We got 6 more teams, and the first out of the 6 was Portland signing Evan Turner to a 4-year, $70 million deal in the 2016 offseason. Turner averaged 10 points, 5 rebounds, and 4.5 assists for the Celtics the year prior, and that basically got him $17 million from the Blazers in the following offseason. Turner ended up playing in 3 seasons for Portland, averaging 8 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and shot 44% from the field. Like the Phoenix Suns, the Sacramento Kings had some really bad draft picks of the decade, and it was hard to pick which one has been the worst so far between Nick Stauskas, Willie Cauley-Stein, Ben McLemore, or Jimmer Fredette. So that could just be their worst move of the decade. All in one is just their drafting, pretty much. Just besides De'Aaron Fox, they really haven't drafted anyone solid in the decade. I guess you can give them props for drafting Isaiah Thomas 60th overall. But I ended up going with a really stupid trade they made in 2015, where they traded away Nick Stauskas, Carl Landry, Jason Thompson, and a 2017 first round pick that ended up being Romeo Langford. So it didn't end up being that valuable as a pick, that it maybe what could have been top 5, but then the Celtics used this to trade down from 1 and Philly traded up using this pick from this trade. But yeah, they basically did this in a salary dump where they ended up getting Arturas Gudaitis and Luka Mitrovic for those 4 assets, and it just was a horrible trade from the beginning. For San Antonio, like another team that has just been super respectable for the last pretty much 30 years, and they didn't really have that many bad moves of the decade, but I ended up going with trading Kawhi Leonard for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a first-round pick. The reason why I have this as their worst move of the decade is because at the time they traded away Kawhi, he was a top 7 player in the league. And if you look at what the Pelicans got for Anthony Davis, the Thunder got for Paul George, they pretty much got the short end of the stick for Kawhi Leonard. The Raptors, it was really hard to find one of their worst moves of the decade. I ended up going with them trading for Rudy Gay in the 2013 season. It was part of a 3-team trade, and they basically traded Jose Calderon, Ed Davis, a former lottery pick, and a 2013 second-round pick for Rudy Gay. And Rudy Gay was solid for the only year he played in Toronto, which was 33 games, and he averaged 19.5 points, 6.5 rebounds, and shot 42% from the field. But then basically giving up on him after only holding on to him for 11 months, they ended up trading him to the Sacramento Kings for Chuck Hayes, Patrick Patterson, John Salmons, and Grievous Vasquez. But they ended up trading Grievous Vasquez for Norman Powell and a future first-round pick that ended up being OG Anunoby, so even the Raptors' worst moves ended up turning into great moves. For the Utah Jazz, it was a move that they made in 2019, and that was trading for Mike Conley. To get Mike Conley, they traded away Grayson Allen, the pick that ended up being Darius Baisley, Jay Crowder, Kyle Korver, and a 2020 first-round pick. And that pick is protected 1 through 7 and 15 through 30, so that will kind of get deferred for the next couple of years. But on paper, trading away a future first-round pick, a 2019 first-round pick, and their 2018 first-round pick in Grayson Allen. 3 first-round picks technically for Mike Conley, who has been pretty disappointing this year for them in his age 32 season, averaging 13.5 points, 4.3 assists, and has shot 40% from the field. And to wrap it out, the worst move of the decade for the Washington Wizards was signing Jan Mahimi to a 4-year, $64 million contract in the 2016 offseason. Mahimi has played in 4 years in Washington, averaging 5 points, 4.5 rebounds, and has shot 52% from the field in less than 17 minutes a night. Yeah, that was a horrible contract signing. But yeah, that is going to be for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you disagree with any of my picks here, let me know in the comments, or was there something that I missed out on completely? You can let me know that in the comments as well. And if you did enjoy the video, if you could leave a like on it, it would really mean a lot to me. Leaving likes on non-rebuilds means a lot to me just because I always do rebuilds. So if I try to kind of expand my content and you guys show support, it means a lot to me, like I said a couple times already. But yeah, thank you all for watching. Hope you guys did enjoy. I love you guys, and I'll see you guys next video. Peace.